Sourdough feeding ratios and baker's percentages. These are two of the things that people are the most confused about. So, feeding ratios. Essentially, the amount that you feed your sourdough starter is a tool for you to be able to control not only how the starter is going to be balanced, but when it is ready. So, if you feed your starter an equal amount of food, 1, equal amounts. For every 1 gram of starter, there are equal amounts of flour and water. That is going to be the fastest rise. So if you get up in the morning and you're like, I want to bake bread as soon as I can, but my starter's not ready, feed it a 1, and it'll be ready the fastest. The higher you feed it, the longer it will take to peak. The higher you feed it, the longer it'll take to peak. If people write in their recipe, feed a 1 something something. The 1 is always the starter, and it means for 1 gram of starter, you're going to do a certain amount of flour and a certain amount of water. So to clear that up. Now, if you are trying to balance an acidic starter, like your starter has been in the fridge for a week, or maybe you left it on the counter for a couple days, and when you open it up, the smell is super intense like acetone. Maybe there's even a little thin line of water on top. Usually, people recommend feeding a high ratio to balance out the starter. You can do that. You can also feed a 1, or a 1, 2, so double the amounts. 2, 1 to 2 is double. And you can feed peak to peak. What does that mean? Feeding peak to peak means as soon as your sourdough starter has fully expanded as tall as it's going to be, you feed it again. You do not let it deflate, because the longer it sits there after peak, the more yeast is going to die and the more bacteria is going to get active. So when you first feed your starter, the yeast is like, so much food, creating all that fermentation, all the CO2, all the bubbles. The bacteria is also active, but the bacteria has a longer amount of time where it's active. So if you then forget about your starter after it comes to peak for a few hours, the yeast is starting to die down. It's starting to lose its food source, and the bacteria is starting to take over. And the more the bacteria takes over, the more acidic of a starter that you have. So the more you feed it peak to peak, so when it's at peak, you feed it again, the more you're going to reduce the acid load. I hope you understand that. It can be kind of confusing. Now, baker's percentages. Every single percentage that you ever see in any recipe is described as the ratio of a certain ingredient to the total amount of flour. So if there is whole wheat flour and bread flour and all-purpose flour in the recipe, all three of those numbers will go together to create what is the 100% benchmark. So if you have 1,000 grams of flour in a recipe and you have 600 grams of water, 600 divided by 1,000 is 60%. There's a rule of thumb that generally 2% of the flour weight is how much salt we put in, because that's what tastes good. And there's a general rule of thumb that most people use 20% of starter to flour. You don't have to use 20%. You use less starter, and it's going to take a longer time to ferment. You use more starter, and it's going to have a shorter fermentation time. There's also a general consensus or agreement that if you make inclusions, so you add other things into your loaf, that it's about 20% of the flour weight. So again, if you have 100 grams of starter, so let's use the actual percentage amount, 100%. Yay, you got 100%. That's the most you can get. If you have 100 grams of flour and then you add in 20 grams of cheese, then you have added 20% inclusions into your loaf. Please ask me questions on here. I know this can be super confusing, and I really want it to be easy for you guys to understand these two terms, because they're used in a lot of recipes and a lot of posts, and it's just some sourdough jargon that once you get it, you get it.